Seahawks fans, wherever you may be. Welcome back to another edition of the Seahawks Playbook Podcast. Join your host, Bill Alvstad, and co-host, sports writer and football analyst Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football. Hey, Seahawks fans, welcome into another episode of the Seahawks Playbook Podcast. I'm sitting down with Keith Myers. I'm Bill Alvstad. Welcome in, Keith. How you doing?
I'm doing great, Bill. How are you?
Doing good. I understand you guys are like closed down for the day up in the Pacific Northwest with some snow.
Not everywhere in the Pacific Northwest. It's mostly just the Portland area. I live in Vancouver, and we got about 4 inches of snow last night and this morning. And so everything's shut down, but it's all going to melt and it's all going to be gone by tomorrow. We'll be back to normal. It's just a weird freak storm that came in.
I heard it was like 76 degrees last week.
It was. It hit just under 80. And then this week it's snowing.
I got some pictures from some neighbors of my old house in Westland up on the hill there and just outside of Portland. And they had like 7 inches of snow, and it just looked like a winter wonderland. I mean, it was just crazy.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it was nuts. And then down below, where like 205 runs through Westland, that area didn't get any snow. So literally a 700-foot elevation increase was everything it took to get to that point where stuff was going to stick around. So
yeah, and I understand that from some people that I was texting up closer to the Seattle area, that for them it's cold. It's like 45 degrees, but it's sunny and nothing. So
yeah, you sent me a text picture this morning of your deck, and it's gorgeous. I mean, I just have to say that it's always beautiful when it snows in the Pacific Northwest with all the fir trees and it's just crazy. All right, so we're going to get into the show today. We're going to do last week we built on an idea that we were going to take a look at Seahawks players at each draft spot in the draft. So
we made it through two rounds.
Yeah, players that were going to be around pick 9, players that were going to be around pick 40 and 41. And then we just kind of maybe touched a little bit on a couple of later things, but we thought today's show we'd kind of focus on the mid-round to late-round prospects that will be on Seattle's radar, and just kind of go through some of those players. And then Keith wanted to battle me a little bit. To fight, just a good old word brawl about the Seahawks roster today. So we'll probably bring in a little bit of that too. I don't even have any idea what your intention is, but I'm for it. I'm here for it, man.
No, there's no intention. It's just I think much less of Seattle's roster as it's currently constructed than you do. I think that's
true.
I think this is a 3-win team. And so when we're looking at players, like I don't care in this draft, I don't care about win now players because this team's not winning now no matter what they do. If it's a project, if it's a higher ceiling guy but it's more of a project, I'm okay with that. And I think that's going to be one of those things that I think is going to separate who you and I are targeting as we get into these middle rounds.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a legitimate proposal of strategy and an argument there. I'm still trying to reconcile my brain around the idea that I know that Pete Carroll is not a lay down type guy, type coach person. So there's going to be no trying to lose games or anything like that at all. They're going to try to build a roster that is more than a 3-win roster. And so that's why I do believe, because of those efforts and just the will of the coach pulling them along, and some of the players we still have, like Quandre Diggs and some other guys, that just won't allow that team to, I think, just win 3 games. I think they're going to be close to where they were last year, to be completely honest. Like that doomsday 6 to 8 wins where they're just in the middle. It's not going to give them the greatest draft pick in the world, but it is what it is. I just think it's going to be more like that.
I just don't see this team scoring enough points to matter.
Well, we
I
still
think
have to go through the draft process, and we still have to go through the remainder of camp and so forth, where they could maybe add a player or whatever. But
unless they add a legit quarterback, it does not matter.
it doesn't,
It really does not matter.
I agree with that. I agree with that. Now, what happens to Baker Mayfield? Could Baker Mayfield get you to 9 wins with this roster? Not today's roster, but maybe after the draft roster plus 1 or 2. I mean, if they get Baker Mayfield, maybe they'd try a little bit more. Maybe they bring in a cornerback. Richard Sherman's still sitting out there. I know that he probably doesn't have too much left in the tank to offer, but
you look at what happened last year. I don't think he has anything left in the tank. I think he's pretty much done. So it's.
But you know what I mean? They could add a couple of pieces.
With Russ gone, the idea that Richard Sherman could come back is much stronger. Like it's much more likely.
I think it would be a good ad just for a guy, to come in, mentor, be a presence. I think that would signal an idea that maybe team is trying to win even more. And I don't know. I'm not worried too much about record this year. I agree. 3 wins is entirely possible. Keith, I'll hand you that. I also think 7 or 8 wins is entirely possible too, depending on the draft, depending on a couple other little moves they might make. Okay.
I don't know. I'm okay. So I get that, but part of it is that you're like, okay, the draft's going to make this roster better, but isn't the draft going to make every roster better?
Yeah, but we've got 4 picks in the top, 75. And I think that gives a team an opportunity to have 3 impact players, maybe 4 out of this draft that could come in and have a nice steady role by mid-season and on. Maybe not right away. Maybe there is a player that comes in right away. Maybe it's a guy like Trevor Penning that comes in immediately starts and he's, has a good impact, but more likely than not, he's going to struggle as well straight out of the gate for at least half a season. So I'm not counting on the draft to make the roster. I'm just saying it will.
Yeah.
All right. So last week, just a reminder, we talked about the 1-9 pick overall and the second round, number 40, number 41. So let's pick it up in the third round, Keith. We've got pick number 372 overall. Why don't you give me a couple of players to start the conversation?
Just for people who are listening, 372 means round 3, pick 72 overall, not pick 372.
There you go.
That's maybe something that you'd worry about in baseball, but not in the NFL. We're talking about pick 72 happens to be in the third round. So a guy that I have been looking at in this spot that I kind of like is Chad Muma, the linebacker out of Wyoming. Mm-hmm. As a guy that can come in and provide some thump in the middle of this new 3-4 defense. Give them a guy that can run downhill and make tackles. And I mean, he's 6'2" or 241. He's got, a reasonably long wingspan, and just a guy that just goes through and has good straight line speed, gets downhill, makes tackles near the line of scrimmage or behind the line of scrimmage. And he just diagnoses running plays really well. I think he's going to be a good inside linebacker.
Yeah. There's a lot of value in this draft. I'll start with that between, say the third round, we've got a pick at 72 there. And our next pick in the fourth round, pick 109. Between there's a lot of value there. I have, probably 25 players that I think would be on the Seahawks radar at various position groups in that range. So I could see them. One of the strategies is maybe we make the picks at in the first round there at 9, stick at 9, stick at 40, stick at 41. You could theoretically drop back into the 80s with this third round pick and pick up maybe an additional couple of fifth round picks that would provide you with some value as well. So because there's so many players there, I think that would be available that their big board may dictate that they could drop back quite a bit there and pick up something.
Yeah.
In that spot, you could look for players like Isaiah Spiller that maybe drops because of his 40 speed. being close to 4.6 as opposed to 4.5, and that might scare off a few teams. But he's just got that athletic upside that the Seahawks like as far as the physicality.
Carson was never a breakaway guy. He was a guy that ran well between the tackles, ran hard, ran over people, but didn't have any kind of breakaway speed whatsoever. So I don't think that will scare off Seattle, a guy like Isaiah Spiller.
One player that we've never, ever talked about, just don't even think that his name has come up, Keith, at all in like 3 months, is Carson Strong, the quarterback out of Nevada, who may be a reason why that guy's the reason I bring it up is this is kind of the area of the draft where he would get some consideration. And I'm just wondering if it would be a consideration for the Seahawks.
I don't see why. Yeah, he is the quarterback that fits in that range because that's about his talent level. But what makes you think that he's a guy that can lead you to a Super Bowl?
Yeah, I don't think that he's that guy today. Could he be developed? I mean, he does have a strong arm. He does have some intangibles that are intriguing to me. I'm not saying he's the best quarterback, but he is kind of a third round kind of guy. And so better than most, probably the 4th or 5th ranked, depending on what list you look at in this draft. And I'm just curious as to if the Seahawks see anything there or would see anything there that would be attractive to Pete Carroll to run the Shane Waldron offense.
Yeah. I mean, you're looking at Kirk Cousins when he came out of Michigan State, and a guy with good, reasonably decent tape, but a lot of question marks in terms of, arm
decision making, right?
And just recognizing that he's a guy that can develop into a good player, but he's not a good player. And I don't know. If I'm taking a quarterback in a situation where I need a quarterback, which Seattle does, I want to take a guy that has the potential to become a franchise quarterback. I don't see that. I think that's he's a safe quarterback, low ceiling, but high floor. And so therefore he's going to most likely slide into being a long-term backup in the NFL.
Yeah, I agree.
And that's not what Seattle needs.
Well,
and if they've
never really developed a solid backup quarterback option that's young and under contract for but
if they're
virtually nothing.
If they're going to wait and then draft a quarterback a year from now, when it's a good quarterback class, do you want your starter and your backup to be in their first and second year together?
It's unlikely.
That is a really tenuous position to be in terms of your quarterback room. And a lot of times you want that veteran long-term backup there to just help teach the youngster, what they're looking at on film and what they're seeing and all those kind of things. You want your quarterback room to have that veteran presence. I don't want a first year and a second year guy in there at the same time.
So at 372, this is kind of an important pick. This is an important area of the draft where I think you could still get a quality guy. Now, based on the strategy that we saw in our last show together at 9, or, if we drop back a little bit, and then at 40-41, say in those first 3 picks, we're picking a tackle, we're picking one of those premier linebacker guys or an edge guy. Where do you think the Seahawks likely go at this range of the draft based on who's available?
Well, if they've gone offensive tackle and then they turned around and went edge rusher, at this point I'm looking cornerback as the biggest need, and that makes this pick a little harder because that's not a great range to be picking cornerback. Now
you could luck out and maybe have Tariq Woolen fall. Now that would have been easier. That would have been easier said than done, I think, a month or 2 ago before the combine, and now after. I'm just not so sure he's on the board here, but man, that would be a guy I would just fall in love with.
Yeah, but I'm like, who else? Who else is available in this range that you'd be happy with? And I
Martin
honestly,
Emerson, actually, I think is underrated. The guy out of Mississippi State. I would maybe take a look at that. And I'm not exactly sure how he fits into the Seahawks scheme, but he's really the guy. And then you're really kind of reaching after that for a guy like Marcus Jones, or maybe you're going to take a safety like Brian Cook or Colby Bryant out of Cincinnati. Both those guys are interesting with a lot of athletic upside. Zion McCollum's a guy, but I think at 72 you would reach, for a guy like that. You would hope that he might be there with your first round pick. So I would, I hear the cornerback thing, and maybe that's why they would drop back. And they go with like a Josh Joby out of Alabama. I know Carl Scott is very familiar with him, and maybe he would feel comfortable with him in the defensive back for Seattle.
Maybe this is why the Seattle is looking at cornerbacks that are going to go in round one. I mean, they're the ones that the team's talking to, that they're bringing in for workouts.
Yeah,
guys like Amit Gardner.
Yeah, right. Yeah, because there's certain levels in the draft, and corner is not at this level, right?
Yeah, so there's often in each, there's like a shelf, right, or a cliff where there's a whole bunch in a certain range, and then there's a big gap before the next group comes in. Well, this is kind of the area where I think Seattle would like to pick a corner, because I mean, this is the Shaq Griffin window, but this year's draft doesn't seem to have. Now, Tony Pauline thinks that Kyler Gordon out of Washington will go in this range. I think that he'll go earlier, but if he's there, that would be a good pick. I just think he's going to go, significantly earlier than, the late 70s. So
yeah, I think out of all the guys that we've talked about in the last 3 months or so, there's about 2 or 3 that are on my radar in this range. Troy Anderson, Tucker, out of Montana State. They may go up and try to do the running back, solve the running back thing. If it's not Spiller, I think that they could be looking at a guy like Dameon Pierce. A lot of the mocks have Dameon Pierce going towards the back or early fourth. And I think with his skill set, he'll be somewhat coveted. I think he comes off the board a little sooner. So maybe Seattle drops back from 72 to 82 or something like that. And then that Dameon Pierce kind of pick, I think, which would be a perfect kind of running back specimen for the Seahawks to have in their running back room. Maybe a guy like that becomes viable. And then a guy, Channing Tindall, the linebacker out of Georgia, with all that speed and scheme diversity that he would bring, that would be a great value in that spot too. And then there's other guy, a whole bunch of other guys. I mean, you go tight end, you can go wide receiver, safety. There's still some edge rusher, a guy like Sam Williams, the interior offensive lineman Cole Strange, who looks like a great center prospect, could be available in that range. I think it's an interesting draft for the Seahawks because it really sets up well. It's interesting because ask Keith, I think we've gone into the draft needing 2 players, and then everyone else is kind of best available. And we've had those conversations where it's just kind of boring. There's not a lot to talk about. In this draft, it seems like everything, and the strategy is difficult to predict because John Schneider kind of rolls it out with action. Is he going to stay at 9? Going to be an interior D cornerback? Is it going to be Trevor Penning tackle? And that kind of dictates the rest of the draft, what they're looking for in which areas. And I just think it's fascinating because so many position groups the Seahawks need that they could just go in a number of different directions, which actually gives them pretty decent flexibility.
Yeah, I mean, it's nice that they could go any direction, but it's also not good that they could go any direction because that means the roster is one big hole.
Oh, talk about the roster again. Yes. Well, this is the fight. Is this the fight?
No, we've already had it. But I'm just going to say that we talked about quarterback and how it kind of just makes the rest of this not be as meaningful because they don't have one. But then you bring up left tackle, or for that matter, right tackle. The interior of their line is set for the most part, but they're both their offensive tackle positions.
I know it's bare. It's bare.
There's nothing. I mean, you're talking about Stone Forsythe on the left and Jake
Yeah,
Curran on the right.
essentially two rookies who are completely unproven.
Yeah, and that's who they've got. They've got to get a top end tackle in this draft, and that's why you and I keep talking about guys like Trevor Penning, with an opportunity to go and become a left tackle of the future. But the Seahawks have been looking at really hard at cornerback in that range. So maybe that's the direction they plan on going, and then trying to address the tackle position later.
Okay, so if they address tackle position later, they've got picks 40, 41, and 72, 109 possibly, but it gets kind of bleak after that. Abraham Lucas and Rasheed Walker are kind of the two tackles in this area of the draft that seem to be on everybody's draft boards, and quite frequently people are mocking Abraham Lucas to the Seahawks to either be the right tackle or left tackle, depending on how they view him. Is this a good area where they'd be looking?
Yeah, and another guy would be Darian Kennard, the offensive tackle out of Kentucky. Is another guy.
I keep forgetting about him.
People at one point, people were talking about him being in the late 20s, the back end of the first round, and I was like, no, don't do it. He doesn't belong in there, and we've seen him, on big boards just drop and drop and drop, and now he's being listed in the 70s, and I think this is the range where he belongs. He's a guy with, doesn't have the highest ceiling, but has a pretty high floor. Can come in, and you're just not investing as much into him, but he still has the potential to play and be good, not great, but good. And so I think that's a good range for Kennard.
Yeah. What's interesting, and I just thought about this too, if John decides to drop back at 9 to say go to 14, 15, 16, this is the area of the draft at pick 72, where if he picks up an additional pick, this is kind of the range where that additional pick would be sitting too. So we could end up with 372 and maybe an additional 376 or whatever. And so you might get two players in this range. Maybe a Dameon Pierce, you get a one luxury pick, or maybe it's a wide receiver that they really like that's kind of scheme diverse. So you get a playmaker in this area, which is kind of the range that you kind of look for those kind of guys. And then maybe it's a linebacker or a edge or a corner, or somebody that they can develop a little bit. So let's go on to the fourth round at pick 109. What do you think about that?
So at pick 109, generally when you get down here in the fourth round, you're not necessarily looking for day one starters, but you are looking for someone you believe can turn into a starter eventually. So I was looking, going down here, and I was thinking, well, if you're going to draft a running back in this draft, Tyler Algier out of BYU kind of makes sense in this range. And it's also, it's late enough where you're drafting a running back where I think that although the people who are still angry about the Rashad Penny pick will be like, yeah, this is late enough and early enough that it's okay. And I think that overall, he's just a guy that can come in and be that first and second down running back for you.
I agree. I think that, he often gets overlooked. I think a skill set that I think the Seahawks would like. He kind of runs over you. He doesn't avoid contact. He's a breaking tackle kind of a guy. Kind of fits Pete Carroll's mold. Another guy like that would be Zamir White, the running back out of Georgia, who kind of fits that same mold. I understand that he's kind of racing up boards just because of the way that he tested and the fact that he doesn't have a lot of mileage on his body. Rashad White out of Arizona State is another running back that has pretty decent measurables and great speed out of the backfield. He's more of a pass catching kind of a running back initially, but I think that he's got a little bit more to offer, maybe in the DJ Dallas mold, where he could come in a pinch and give you in between the tackle type stuff. What else, Keith? I think this might be an area where they do address. Maybe that's a little early. I was going to say quarterback, the guy, the kid from I can't remember where he's from, but Caleb Ellaby, the quarterback, would be a consideration as a developmental kind of guy. if you wanted to have something like that going. Cam Taylor-Britt, the corner, I think might be on their radar just because of his scheme diversity as far as being able to play in the slot, and could be your second too high safety, your second free on the roster as well. A guy very similar to the guy that we currently have on the roster, Ugo Amadi.
Yeah, so kind of in that same idea, but he's more of a cornerback than a safety, but can kind of do both. Alontae Taylor, the cornerback out of Tennessee, 6 foot, 199, ran a 4.36 on the 40, so he's got some wheels, good vert, and not known as a sticky corner, but he has got that speed and a little bit of ability to go get the ball when he's in position. It's just a matter of he's not the stickiest corner in terms of like man-on-man coverage. So it kind of depends on what the team is looking at doing, in terms of their coverage scheme and that kind of stuff. You seem to want them to do a lot of press man. Pete Carroll's a zone guy, and so I'm not sure if that's if they're gonna go that route. Maybe they are, because the new defensive brain trust that they brought in this year kind of fits that. But if they go more of a zone route, especially if they want to, run like cover 3, kind of like they used to, Alontae Taylor would be a perfect outside corner for that.
Interesting. All right, let's go to the 5th round, Keith. We've got a couple picks sitting there at 153, 154, I believe, although the big board that I'm looking at shows the Seahawks at the Seahawks.com site shows Seattle at pick 145. I'll have to score that up, but we're in that range. We've got a couple picks.
Yeah, so there's a lot of players in this range that I think that we would like. There are guys that I think that would come in and help the Seahawks and be good additions, but they don't tend to have name recognition. A guy that you and I have mocked to Seattle, Velus Jones Jr., a wide receiver out of Tennessee, it falls in this range according to some big boards. Other big boards have him in the 80s. Well, to give you an idea of how polarizing, I guess, for no other reason this guy is. And
I think he's more athletic traits than he is route runner right now. That's the thing with him, and he's kind of a kick returner kind of guy.
He's a kick returner. He's an athletic trait guy who needs to work on adding to his route tree, but he is a guy that could be a weapon. Get the ball on like wide receiver screens and do something with it. The
4.36 speed.
Yeah, a lot of yards after the catch ability, and I think that it's a type of thing that this team would look at and be like, yeah, that's something that we could use.
I agree. A couple other players that I was thinking about would be Amara Barno. I think that he's going to go a little early, but he really showed up at the Senior Bowl as far as being a guy on the edge that was kind of giving offensive tackles and on stunts, guards at the Senior Bowl some trouble, just from his initial quickness and twitch. What else did I write down? I wrote down Braxton Jones, I think it's Southern Utah offensive tackle that seems to have the athletic fit in a zone scheme, and would be kind of a different offensive tackle. We talked about it, bringing in a guy that can be your eventual swing type tackle on the offense would be an interesting pick in this range. What else, Keith? Alec Lindstrom, the interior offensive lineman, D'Angelo Malone. We've talked about it. Edge or Alec from UAB, and a couple of running backs and so forth.
If the team still needs a cornerback, Tariq Castro Fields, cornerback out of Penn State, 6'1", 197 with a 4.38 40.
Yeah, I just think that's awesome. Here's the deal with in general is that I think the team's looking for playmakers, and guys that can break on the ball, and also the team speed on defense has been lacking. And we've talked about that for like 2 years now, that we need to have more team speed, and they've done it in little bits and pieces, but this is the year. There's just a ton of speed in this draft. And I think that the Seahawks can get pretty decent return on guys that can come in and be at least special teams guys that have a lot of speed initially, and then work into the rotation. Okay, so there's a couple picks there, and Seattle may use one of those picks actually to drop back a little bit, so they can be at a different level in the draft, because we don't have a 6th round pick at all. So we don't pick after 153 until the 7th round pick 229. So if they want to get into that 180 to 200 range, they're going to need to maybe drop back with one of those picks.
And there's some interesting players in that range. Chris Paul. No, not that Chris Paul. Who's
Chris Paul? Yeah. Or Tom Paul.
Not the basketball player, but Chris Paul, the interior offensive lineman out of Tulsa.
Yeah.
And then also Isaiah Thomas, but no, not that Isaiah Thomas. The edge player out of Oklahoma. Both a couple of guys that I think will be in that range that are very interesting and kind of fit what Seattle wants to do.
I think there's 2 players that I'm looking at in that range. In Andrew Stuber, he's listed as an offensive tackle out of Michigan. I see him as moving inside to offensive guard in the NFL, and that would be a good spot for him. He was abusive at the Senior Bowl. He was one of those players next to Trevor Penning who were trying to knock guys on the ground, and I kind of dug that from him. And then the other guy I was looking at is Jalen Watson, the cornerback out of Washington State.
Yeah.
Yep. And when you're doing Seahawks draft mocks, it's always popular to pick a guy that's from the Northwest. So he's common on my drafts. Abram Smith, the running back out of Baylor, is a late round option here. That's kind of a bowling ball kind of a running back, where he's short, stocky, has heavy legs, and can just kind of truck you in short yardage situations. What else, Keith? What else is in this range that's interesting to you?
Guys that are interesting. And there's lots of players, but
I like Mike Rose, the linebacker out of Iowa State. He's an interesting prospect. We haven't talked too much about him.
No, we haven't talked about him at all. You're looking at running backs. What about Devonta Price, the running back out of Florida International? We
haven't talked too much about him at all. He's
a catch the ball out of the backfield, make people miss type of running back, not a traditional Pete Carroll running back, but more of a weapon, more of someone you can line up anywhere and do lots of different things with. I think players like that are always fun to have around, and someone I'd look at.
What do you think of Alec Lindstrom, like an interior guy, maybe a guy that could play center for you?
Yeah, actually, that's I mentioned Chris Paul, but I didn't want to list. Hey, here's a whole bunch of offensive linemen, because that's what I like to watch. But Alec Lindstrom's a guy that I like as a center. I think that he can come in, play that role. He was a guard at Boston College, but I think moving inside to center fits him. It fits his game. It fits his just kind of what he does. He can pull for you if you need him to. And I just think that would be a good pick. You can get him in this range. That would be great. But remember, we're talking about players that the Seahawks will want to trade into this range for, as part of a pick from in another trade, because they currently don't have one in this range.
Right. And so, and you may reach a little bit if you're not careful, or you could take that 7th round pick and package it with the future or something to kind of move back up a little bit. These picks in the 180 to 220 range are not very expensive. You can almost literally buy one. Mm-hmm. But how about later on in the mid 7th round range at pick 229? There's not a lot there, so you're just looking for upside.
Yeah, at this point you're looking for upside. You're looking for a special teams guy with a lot of athleticism that can maybe develop into a guy who can step in and earn a spot, down the road. A guy maybe like Quentin Lake, the safety out of UCLA. would fit in that range, although he's a guy that I think you might be able to get as an undrafted free agent. He's kind of in that priority undrafted free agent range. Maybe Derek Deese Jr., a tight end at San Jose State, would fit in there. But I don't know if the Seahawks are really looking for a tight end anymore, given what's on their roster. So we're going through running backs at every level here because it's a need. Zaquandre White, the running back out of South Carolina, would be kind of the fit in this area if you're looking for a guy that's gonna come in and pick up that spot.
I've got two more for you.
Go for it.
That you've mentioned before too. CJ Verdell out of Oregon would be a guy. I don't know how much he fits in Seattle's situation, and then Max Borghi, the running back from Washington State, is another one of those local guys that everyone kind of likes, but he actually does kind of fit what the Seahawks would want to have on their roster. Maybe a priority free agent or an undrafted guy. A guy that we've never talked about because we just don't talk about special teams on this show very often, and we certainly haven't addressed it in the draft at all. But their kicker kind of struggled last year, and if a guy like Cade York is sitting there at 229, do they throw a pick out at a kicker to get the best one in the draft to come into their camp and compete for the spot and save about $4 million on their cap?
That's not a bad play, especially in a year when you are, you're not expecting to do a lot. So if you have a player that misses a clutch kick or something because he's a rookie, who cares, right? But it really is hard to think of Pete Carroll moving away from. He fought with trying to find a kicker after the move where they got rid of Steven Hauschka, and it hurt this team, and it just bit him in the butt like multiple years in a row. The Blair and then Janikowski, and finally they went and they paid to bring in a kicker, and people are like, he struggled. Did he? Look at his stats. There's this kind of
he just fell off from the year before, is all I'm saying.
Yeah, but there's this belief that he's like, and you can listen to Seahawks Twitter, and according to them, he's always been bad.
No. He had 30 some odd field goals in a row prior.
36 in a row.
Which is great.
Yeah, and so it gets down to that range. He, for some reason, it's a weird where he misses extra points more than I'd like, but he's good on field goals, especially field goals at range. So I think that he's probably safe, but $4 million against the cap. If you can use a 7th round draft pick on someone to come in and compete with them and take that spot over, it's hard to say no to. And that $4 million a cap can be valuable down the road.
I would say that there's 2 Notre Dame players I'm looking at in this range. You can probably guess one of them. But the other one we've never really talked about before. And if Seahawks don't look at quarterback all the entire draft, this is a spot where they may take a look at this one player and think that maybe he's got a little something that they could develop. And that would be Jack Cohen, the quarterback. I watched him at the combine. And all he did at the combine was look to be like one of the top 3 or 4 guys throwing the ball there. He was just making all the throws. He made the wide receivers not have to work at catching the ball there. So I just thought it was an interesting observation for me that he just looked like one of the smoothest, sure throwers there at the combine. And so it just kind of made me stop and take notice, but he's always been projected into this range.
Yeah. I honestly, if I'm taking a quarterback in this range, I'd look at Bailey Zapp instead of Western Kentucky. I just think he's a higher ceiling player. Yeah.
I mean, if he's there, absolutely. The other guy I was talking about was Kevin Austin Jr., the wide receiver. I've mocked him a few different times, but here's a guy with just a bunch of speed who's 6'2", 198 pounds, and just has some upside. And at the very least could give you some kick return ability, special teams kind of stuff. Other than that, I mean, there's a number of guys that you could go. Reggie Robertson, the wide receiver out of SMU. Jeremy Moon, you mentioned before, an edge guy out of Florida. Monteric Brown, the cornerback. Denario Drummond, the wide receiver. I thought he had a good combine. And that's it.
Yeah.
That's all I got.
I would say I like in like the 7th round and that kind of stuff to go find positions that are not usually high on a priority list, but have special teams like ability. And so a guy like Jojo Doman out of Nebraska, or David Annaly out of Houston, both guys with some speed at linebacker that look like special teams players, like guys that can come in and be, your gunner on special teams and, do that job. So those are the types of players that I'm usually looking at in this round, just because it's a 7th round. Like, good players are gone.
There's tons of wide receivers, safeties, corners, and just leftover interior offensive linemen that nobody's really taken at this point, that are kind of project guys. This is really kind of your shadow roster and priority guys that are on your practice squad. Is kind of what you're looking for here. All right. Anything else, Keith?
No, I think we've been through a lot of names, and if you're still listening to us, I'm sure you're on name overload. But go ahead and look some of these guys up. There, you'll have some fun with it and get a chance to look at some good players, some highlight film. It's a lot of fun. So
yeah, we're literally just about 2 weeks away from the draft. So we've got another few shows. Keith's going to be here in person with me during the draft, and we'll put together a couple of shows while you're here during the draft. But before you get here, I'm sure we'll have our final mock draft to kind of nail this thing in. We'll see how many picks we can nail, or at least the reality is we probably won't nail more than one for either one of us, but we're getting honed in on the type of player that the Seahawks are really interested in. Now, there's so many different variables that come into the exact pick at the exact time and so forth. But I think position group wise and the players in those position groups, I think we have a pretty decent idea. So I think that's it for now. Let's wrap this thing up. You can find Keith on Twitter at Myers NFL. I'm at NW Seahawk. You can find the show at Hawks Playbook on Twitter, and you can find us on your favorite podcast platform, literally anything: iHeart, iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, all that kind of stuff. And then YouTube. You can find us on our YouTube channel and subscribe. So until next time, go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook Podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NW Seahawk. Keith is at Myers NFL, and the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.